What I'm going to be talking about today is the faith of Ananias, or having faith like Ananias. Ananias was a gentleman who was following Jesus, a disciple of Jesus. And during that time, Saul, who became Paul, was someone that was basically going around. He was like a bounty hunter for Christians. Like he would go out and find them, judge them, persecute them, and convict them. Um, and Saul was struck by blindness, and during that same period, at that same time, God told Ananias to go to him and help him. And I think of that from a humanistic aspect. I take that, or I look at that from where I'm at. How many times has God told us to do something and we're afraid? Like, hey, what if this happens? And He did that. Like, how much would it take? Because that's why I respect His faith, because it was truly tested back then, because something He knew what Saul could do. He knew what Saul had already done. I mean, Saul was that coat check at stonings. Like, he was that guy that, hey, here's a good rock. Make sure you get a good throw. He was that guy who was, one. If you knew he was coming into town, you knew that you were about to have a bad day. And so when Ananias was told by God to, hey, go to him, bring him back, speak to him, baptize him, talk to them, he was like, "Are you sure?" We're talking about the same Saul, right? About 5'8", 5'10", dark hair, brown eyes. And yeah, guy was like, "Go to him, go do this." And I read in Acts 9:13 through 14. Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem, and he has come here with the authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on his name. So, having faith of Ananias doesn't mean that you don't go to God with questions, because Ananias still did. Ananias still did what God told him to do. Yes, he was fearful, but he still did it because God told him to do it. And that's what we have to understand, is that even though we may have an opinion, a fear, a desire for something different than what God has for us, we can't allow our fear of other people or fear of persecution to occur, because one of the first points I would like to make is that God already has a plan. God already had an end state for Saul. Saul was already going to become Paul, and he was already going to do the things he did. God already had that plan out there. He just needed Saul to come in line and to follow Jesus and speak about the things that he needed him to speak about. And I take the understanding that God has everything already planned by Revelations 13:10, where it says, "If anyone has to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people." Ananias had that faith. He had that faith to understand that, yes, I'm gonna ask God, hey, God, are you sure about this thing? Because this person's a really bad, like with Saul, this guy's a really bad dude. And so Ananias asked God about that, but he was going to do it because he understood that God already had everything planned, and that if God was, if Ananias was going to have to go through something, if Ananias was going to have to be killed, if Ananias was going to have to be, arrested, that he was ready for that, because he knew that God, at the end of the day, already had that plan. But it still had that fear. Um, fear can fear can stop you from moving. Fear can require you to step back and look at what you're going to do and decide, do I understand this is God's will? Or am I not going to do this because I'm so afraid? And usually that fear comes from the fear of man. In Proverbs 29:25, it states, "Fear of man will prove to be a snare. Let whoever trusts in the Lord, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe." Meaning that, yes, that fear of The fear of Saul, it was going to happen, but Ananias, just like we today, need to understand that through God, all things are possible. He gives us the strength to do those things. Um, Failure happens when we allow that fear to override what we already know God's going to have us do. We can slow down. We can stop doing what God wants us to do. We can, because we have that right, I guess you could say, that decision of, hey, I'm going to make my own decision. I'm my own man. But really, that's just fear, because if you believe in God and you know God told you to do something, then that fear you have is that fear of man, that fear of that persecution that may come in the earthly. But understanding, like Ananias did, that yes, that he was thinking that, hey, if I go to Saul, Saul's going to kill me, Saul's going to arrest me. So God, that Saul, right? And God was like, yes, that Saul. I need you to go. I need you to go to him, bring him here, heal him, and give him the word, and let him know that my word needs to be taken out. But it was that fear of man, and for us knowing that fear of man will stop us, will snare us, will trap us, and to staying where we are now. If we want to be further in the kingdom of heaven, we need to get away from that fear of what a man may think of us, or what a person. And when I say men, I mean it holistically. I don't mean male, female, just men. We need to ensure that we're not fearing some other people to keep us where we're at, and understanding that persecution, because you can fear the individual, but you can also fear the ideas. Um, in Psalms 3:6, it says, "I will not fear though tens of thousands assail me on every side." Um, that that assailant, that is not just a person. That's a thought. That's I'm not good enough. Yeah, God's called me, but um, like Noah had Moses had a stutter. Um, you know, there's countless other stories of apostles and prophets. Even today, like Apostle Jimmy. I mean, he had the education of. He didn't have the education that many would think that he should have had to be where he got. He could allow that fear of man, that fear of persecution, that fear of thinking that he could fail. But him, like all of us, had to understand, or did understand, that God told me to do this, so I do it. It doesn't matter what my fear says. It doesn't matter what anything else says. I have that faith, like Ananias. I have that Ananias faith that requires me to just do what God told me, and understand that at the end of the day, one, His plan is already set. Two, that the snare of man can't hold me back. Just like that thought, those fears, those fearful thoughts, that idea that I'm not good enough, or I'm not able to do this because I don't have that degree. I didn't listen to that person. I didn't pat that person on the back. I don't sit close enough to the altar. That somehow will require me to not do what God told me to do, to have that faith, to step out, that faith to strengthen myself, and understand that man thoughts have no control over me, and that ultimately the only thing that matters is that we walk in line and do the things that God has us to do. So I would challenge those people to have Ananias faith, have that faith of when God tells us to do something, I fear it, but you still do it because it's the will of God.